Caring leaders, welcome. Today's episode of Leadership with Heart and the listening table is titled It's Not Us Versus Them, How to Approach Layoffs and Other Life-Changing Employee Events with Care. We are going to be talking about effective change management and communication. If your company is undergoing some type of change that impacts the lives of your employees, you want to tune in. My name is Jen DeVore. I'll be the facilitator of the discussion today. And you have the great honor and privilege to hear from Heather R. Younger, who is the CEO of Employee Fanatics. Heather is the award-winning leader in the area of employee engagement, as recognized by Inspiring Workplaces. She's a LinkedIn Learning course partner, 3-time best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and the host of the popular Leadership with Heart podcast. And Andy Boian created Dovetail Solutions in 2005 with the idea of facilitating the intersection of private business, not-for-profit organizations, NGOs, and government to accomplish seemingly intractable goals in communications, branding and marketing, community, and civic involvement with results-driven solutions. As the CEO, Andy drives the direction, growth, and strategy for the firm. With more than 34 years of communications experience, Andy has long been known and recognized for his unique ability to connect business and community on behalf of so many. And Andy is also featured in Heather's book, The Art of Caring Leadership, and has been a guest on the show. So Heather and Andy are good friends and strategic partners as well. So welcome to the conversation, Heather and Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, so much. Thank you, Heather, for having me as well.
Absolutely. I love having you on here. Such a great, I think, embodiment of leadership with heart in so many ways, and in the work you do and just how you represent people. So glad to have you.
I'm honored to be here, and that means a lot coming from you. So thank you. You're the true expert. It's fun. It's fun to listen, and it's informative every single time. So honored to be here.
Well, you both bring a different perspective. So Heather's perspective is going to be as a corporate culture expert, and Andy, you are a communications expert. And the reason why this show is important is because we're seeing a growing trend of culture disconnect between leaders and employees, resulting in companies' reputations being questioned in the public spotlight. And that was the inspiration to bring you two together. And businesses are increasingly turning to professional guidance for managing layoffs and other important goings on in companies that impact the lives of their employees. And if not handled correctly and with care, and without having the change management process managed well, and managing the communication both internal in the organization and external, companies are becoming having their reputations managed in the spotlight for them, whether they are aware of it or not, or whether they're in control of it or not. Some of the employees are taking to social media platforms like TikTok, and these TikToks and these tweets and the Facebook posts are actually even making it onto traditional media platforms. So this is an important subject, not just for company communications departments, but also for the individual leaders. So you as an individual leader with people that you care for at work, who you are in the charge of caring for, this is an important topic for you to know about. And let's just kick off the discussion here with Heather. I would like to ask you this question, I think, first. How do you define the current disconnect between leaders and employees that we're talking about, and what are the primary causes?
You know, I feel like this disconnect it goes into way back in history. It keeps going, doesn't it? And I think it's mostly a lot of the folks at the top don't have the pulse on what's happening with their team members. They are really removed from the day to day. I do think part of it is, as well as, there's a lot on their plates. And I have to say that prior to coaching executive leaders, I didn't have their view in mind, understanding that they had that big picture going on, and there's a level of overwhelm happening, and they're trying to stay, in many cases, as connected as they can, but they're falling way behind because there's just so much going on. As market forces, if they're a publicly traded company, there's a lot going on. But I do think them not taking that time to really understand what's happening with their team members in the day-to-day, and also understanding the importance of those people that are driving the business forward. I keep looking at some of these different case studies that we're seeing in the news right now.
Yeah.
And what to me is becoming more and more obvious is that the executive leaders, maybe even at the board level, they're looking at the bottom line numbers, but they're not seeing the ramifications of their actions. They're not close enough to it. So as they take an action, like different layoffs or sending people cookies or all the weirdest things that we're going to be talking about here, they're not close enough to the source. They're not even with it. They're like, they may be 5 level, they may be on the 20th floor and people down here, literally or figuratively, and they just can't see the impact. I think if we allowed them to be closer to the source, they would see the impact. And then maybe they would be more, appropriately changing their behaviors as a result. I'm not saying in every case, but I think in many cases, they're just way too removed from what's happening on the front line.
Okay.
That's
So
absolutely true. Sorry.
So what are some of the common mistakes leaders make that exacerbate the divide?
I think it's a disconnect. Like I think it's that whole like the distance. Like you can't be so distant geographically, mentally, all of that from the people who actually get you to the end result you're looking for. So you need to be, when they say like management while walking around or like being with the people. I remember there was one leader that would very occasionally, a couple times a year, would come and actually move his desk in the center of where everybody else was at. So it was big company, maybe public traded, but he would come down and pop his desk right in the middle of where everything was happening. So he could always have a pulse on what was impacting people, what the customers were saying, so that any kind of strategic things that were happening at that board level and out in the market could be then properly reflected to what's actually being felt and experienced in the front. And so I think that if you remove yourself that way, you're going to always have that issue. That's going to be a big source of that disconnect. But I'd love to, Andy, you're obviously connected to this too, as you're working through, crisis or issues where people or organizations are coming going, we made a mistake. And I know you told us to go this way or that way, but we didn't. And so, what do we do now?
Yeah. And there's a lot of that, Heather, regarding connectivity and the ability for you to connect with the folks that work with you. The disconnect is not only a physical disconnect or an intellectual disconnect, but it's also almost an emotional disconnect where employees sometimes don't feel supported in tough times and in economic times that are sometimes tumultuous, or people are worried about, am I going to get laid off, or am I going to get a job reduction, or is the company doing well? The ability for the leadership team, and not just the CEO, not just the top level people, but also managers and directors, are able to interface with people most often. It really alleviates that concern. They're clearer about mission. They're clear about where we are strategically, and they're more transparent. I use the word transparency a lot in my business in communication, specifically around, sometimes the bottom line number is not appropriate to share with every member of the firm, but a general idea about how the company's working and functioning and succeeding and thriving as a result of an economy that sometimes is confusing, or we might not know what's going to happen next. But the ability for the folks that lead or are part of the leadership team to be in the middle of those conversations with people is really important. Now, we find in communications, sometimes employees aren't willing to be as open or as talkative about their concerns when leadership's involved. But what you can do is transfix that or move that needle if you're more regularly involved in just day-to-day things too. So I like the idea of moving into the center of a room. I'm not a big fan of private offices for top brass of companies. I think it's more important to be amongst those with whom you work and your team, but also not only the emotional and intellectual connection, but also the ability to just be one of the people in the group. Listening is a critical part of succeeding, in my opinion. Oftentimes leadership does not listen enough. And if they're just willing to sit back and kind of just take in what they're seeing and listening to and what folks are talking about without making comment, or sometimes even without, passing judgment or coming up with an answer right away, just listening is critical to the success of any company. And, we talk a lot about communications being about voice. Sometimes it's about your 2 ears as well. You can communicate with your ears, and it's important to listen very intently as well.
So Heather, last week you had a question on your LinkedIn profile, and the commenter said, "Ooh, I'd love to hear them talk about the differences of laying off frontline employees versus leaders in the company." So you just talked about, moving yourself and getting more geographically closer and approachable to your employees. What are some of the key strategies that you would suggest on between laying off frontline employees and leaders in the company? How would you handle communication around that differently?
Oh, I was just thinking, Andy, a good example of this is that Bayer, the pharmaceutical giant Bayer, and them trying to go where they're trying to have more self-managed teams and go managerless by laying off, I don't know, thousands, I don't know, 10,000, a lot of managers. And part of that question that they brought up in that Bayer example was, is this just another opportunity for them to lay people off and make it seem innovative? Or is this something that's really going to give power back to the people and allow them to self-manage themselves? I am curious to know, let's just say you were advising Bear in that example. What might you say when they're looking to kind of lay off the managers that didn't say, now we're going to do this other thing? What would be the messaging, I guess, in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, the messaging is that we're one team and we're a part of this. We're together in this, and we're making the best decisions for everybody. But anytime you are in a situation where you have to think about how to communicate tough news, and it may be about a layoff, or it may be about we lost a client, or we unfortunately we're gonna lose a little top line revenue as a result of something. You oftentimes include as many as possible in the conversation, and you want to support the conversation with not just the negative news, not just the "oh, woe is us" kind of thing, like this happened, but also about some successes that have led up to the company being ultimately successful long term, and couch it less about this is for the good of the company. So in a layoff situation, I've always been struck by managers and leaders that say, well, it's for the good of the company. Well, is it really? Because you hired the people originally that you're laying off to better the company. So if you're laying them off, how is that bettering the company? So there are ways in which you can manage the communication structure so that it makes sense to people. It's totally incongruent to say a layoff is for the betterment of something or somebody or an entity. People, that doesn't make sense to anybody, even those folks that aren't being laid off, because they could be colleagues, they could be friends, they could be thinking about what is really the best thing to do in situations like this, and sharing news like that. And again, I go back to not having this as a surprise. People, when they receive bad news, the less often you can make it about it being surprising or shocking to them, the better. So that they see way down the road. They don't see just 5 minutes down the road. They see 10 miles down the road, and they think, you know what? We have some tough things coming up, and we have some ways in which we have to work around some obstacles. We have to think about what's best for all of us. But the collective is what's important, not just the leadership saying, here's what we have to do to make this problem go away or to make it better, or it's for the better of all of us. But it really is, if it's truly for the better of all of us, can we all be a part of discussing it? Can we all be a part of how this communicates and resonates with us personally and professionally? People say that there's a difference between a professional and personal in business or in generally in corporate America, and there is, but it's also becoming more personal, because even after COVID made this employment work and the businesses and the way in which we do business even more personal, because people were taking care of kids that were staying at home and managing their businesses at the same time, managing their jobs at the same time. And we haven't really changed from that much. Now it's about, how do we manage all this, and how are we more humane? The more humane you can be, the better. The more you can move the feelings of the folks that work with you into your own feelings, the better you are as a leader, I believe. And so in those situations, communication is absolutely critical. And that's a very non-traditional way to look at communications in business. A lot of people say, well, be vague or be opaque, or, we hear people say, don't express all the details, just talk about the high level. And we just fundamentally as a firm disagree with that. We just think that it's important to lay it out. People will accept it and understand it better if you're clearer, if you do include the details. And that's a really important part of that.
I think that's
Heather,
critical.
I know you have a personal story and personal experience that you use in your caring leadership presentations and keynotes. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your personal layoff story and how that inspired you to teach and speak and write books about caring leadership?
Yes. Well, interesting. I do want to say this, that for those of you who are watching now or will later, that I do believe that that layoffs do serve a purpose. So I'm a business person, and I understand sometimes they're necessary. So you're not hearing us say, I think, that, oh gosh, you should never ever lay anybody off. That's not what we're saying. It's the way in which we do it that makes all the difference in how people feel. So my experience, my only time I was ever laid off, and it hurt. I was working for a company that was private equity had bought about 4 or 5 companies, and we were merging together. And in the process of the merger, they were doing the opposite of what Andy's referring to here, which is they weren't really listening to customers and employees. They weren't including us at all. So there were surprises left and right. There was fear and mistrust that was really taking hold. People with titles real similar to the titles of the people who were already there were coming in the other companies, and everybody was wondering, am I going to lose my job? And so I'm in the middle of this, and I'm feeling really dragged down just like everybody else, but I'm trying to be this positive uplifter person. And I go to the head of HR and I said, we need to do something about this lack of engagement, this mistrust. And she said, you're right. You should go do something about that. And I'm like, wait, what? I don't understand that. I am leading customer experience. Why am I responsible for this? But I kind of already acted like a cultural ambassador, bringing people around the table who already seemed to have this desire to be the change they were seeking. And so we created an employee engagement council and just started to listen to people. We started to do the things that everybody else wasn't doing, which is listening and noticing how we could break down the walls of mistrust, creating more unity with the team that was there. Did team member scavenger hunts and just all types of things, try to bring people together so they could see each other as humans, like not just as like people replacing them. And it started to work. And I think the more people were listened to, even in that space, even if it wasn't by the executive leaders, the more they felt like, okay, we can do this. But there was this merger, and they weren't making great decisions, and they weren't listening when they were trying to roll out all these new things. And then the layoff took place, and there were 200 in the first round, and I was in that first round, and it hurt a lot. Of course, I was a breadwinner of a family of 6 at the time, and I was going like, "What's going to happen?" My head was spinning. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I have to say that in that process, a couple of the things that were done well. So it was like right at the layoff, the person who was my manager, previous to the one who was my current manager, was on the call. I could sense that he had a high level of emotion about his decision that I was going to be one of those people to do it. And I could hear that he was hurt by having to even have the conversation. That, even though it still hurt me again, I felt better that at least he was impacted or affected by the need to do it. Then the HR team was just kind of very open and flexible at that time. We didn't have benefits through that company. And so they made it, the head of HR for the combined company made a decision to insure us for the next 3 months on their nickel, even though I wasn't even part of their insurance. So there was no need for them to do it, but they did it anyway. Mm-hmm. That particular manager, again, who was like the senior manager above the manager, who was actually the current manager, the one who showed the emotion on the call, he made a decision that he would pay out this big bonus that I was, in my mind, I was owed, but I think according to the rules, they didn't have to. And so there were all these things where they just leaned in and made all these different exceptions to say, we want to make this person not whole, because you can never be whole through a layoff, but make this person, when they transition out, they're going to feel like they left with dignity. I felt like they did multiple other things that really just said to me that they cared. And it didn't hurt like less. The layoff was necessary. I knew it because of just all the decisions that were made. It didn't hurt less, but it did feel more humane and kind on the way out. And I think that for me, that was a great example of how to do it right.
Yeah. And Andy, I know you also have a unique perspective on how to handle tough conversations with employees. Could you share some of your experience with that?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. We actually have a process in which when we onboard new people, we take really about 90 days to really get them fully onboarded to the firm and to our processes, and allow them to ask questions and allow them to take time to, sometimes it's training, and then they spend the afternoon maybe watching some videos of process. And then the next morning they'll visit a client, or they'll go see a prospect of ours, or they'll go visit a reporter that we do a lot of business with, that kind of thing. So they'll get a holistic view of it. And we take about 90 days for that to happen. And then we start to move them into actually working inside the firm and being a part of it. But we really want them to be acclimated to the culture of the firm. They spend a lot of time, having lunch or going out for coffee with team members to understand, well, what do you think is really the valuable part of this firm? And how do you feel when you get in tough situations, so that they feel like they're heard and they're appropriately listened to as they onboard in the firm. But there have been times also when we've had to part ways. And in that situation also, it's a really important conversation, as Heather said, to be humane. I really like that word humane, to be almost like that, that person, Heather, you said, that really hurt when they had to do it. You put yourself in their shoes and you think about, how are they going to feel when they're looking down at the floor, when they're walking out the door and they've been laid off, and how, what kind of feelings are going to be drawn up as a result of what just happened. So when we part ways with people, we actually celebrate and toast to their next adventure. And we what's really important about that is that we respect the dignity of the process and respect the person, but we also understand, as Heather said, layoffs sometimes are inevitable and things have to happen. We have to part ways with people, and that happens. But it doesn't have to be antagonistic. It doesn't have to be always so uncomfortable and so situational that it necessitates being sort of awkward and, gosh, we have to do this and so sorry and thanks for everything. But we do it more about a conversation, and we do it over we toast champagne sometimes, and we say, we're going to toast your next adventure because it's going to be terrific, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you not only reach that, but that you're successful in it. And we'll always be a champion of yours. And that kind of communication, open communication, embracing the fact that it may be a little emotional, not being afraid of that, but also, concerning yourself with, yes, the business of it must take place, but it doesn't have to be business-like. It doesn't have to be officious. It doesn't have to be, tight. It can be conversational and as comfortable as possible, saying, you've got a bright future ahead and we're going to help you get there. We just have to do it in another way. And it's not going to be with us. And I think over the years, my company is almost 19 years old now. And after doing it for so long, it's sort of become tradition that when they onboard, they come on and they feel comfortable. And then in the circumstance in which they offboard, whether it's voluntary or not, we want to make sure that they understand how much they were valued when they were here. And that's an important part of the process. And all the way out to, I have walked people out the door and carried their stuff with them, and talked to them about their families, and had conversations with their family members. It's just a part of being, not really a true family per se, but almost like that. Like it's a step away from, you really care about these people. You brought them on to your company, and you feel like, you spent a lot of effort and time and money and energy getting them acclimated. And then when it's time to leave, you also want to do and spend some of that same capital with them rolling off. And it's not that difficult to do. It's very unique. And it also leaves former employees feeling like, I was really valued. And you really get a chance to show how valuable they were.
So those are great insights from both of you about how to handle layoffs and other life-changing employee events with care. If you're just tuning in, I want to reintroduce our speakers today. We have Heather R. Younger, who's the CEO of Employee Fanatics. She's a company culture and leadership expert, and Andy Boian from Dovetail Solutions. He's a communications strategist and expert, all things internal and external communications. This is your opportunity to get your questions answered. If you are a caring leader within your organization and you have something that's pressing, that's coming up, or just something that's on your mind that you're curious about, make sure that you leave a comment down below. Even if you're not on the live stream and you're watching the replay, your comments are welcome. And Heather and Andy will get to your comments. I do want to shift gears for a little bit. And I'm going to use this example that was in the news recently. Sephora. It wasn't this situation doesn't come from a necessarily like a negatively impacting situation on the lives of employees, but it was in Entrepreneur magazine that Sephora hit $10 billion in revenue, and the workers weren't happy at all because all they got was a stale cookie. And I'm using the employee quotes around the word stale cookie there. that sounds like a communications disaster where this employee is like, look how rich we are, you guys. This is amazing. And then all the employees who are putting in all this work, all they got was a stale cookie. So the employees didn't really appreciate that, did not feel seen, heard, and valued, as you both would say. And so they took to TikTok and they took to social media and Twitter and everywhere else and started
as they should.
The company. They should have. Yeah. So let's talk about from the inside out. Heather, I'll toss it back to you first to talk about what strategies. I just can't get over like how big of a disaster that is. What are some of the strategies that the leaders should have done to prevent that and to show their employees, hey, we care about you. Thank you for being an integral part of our company, and we really appreciate you, versus what they did. And then we'll toss the conversation back to Andy to talk about some of the communications strategies that they could have implemented to save themselves from a social media and PR disaster. So Heather, you first.
Oh gosh, we talked earlier about that disconnect. I mean, this right here shows a utter disregard to another person's lived experience. When they hit that 10 billion, I guarantee you their bonuses were massive. The executive leadership team, board, those above. And what happened, but then they were like, how did they not know the person making $40,000 would like a $1,500 bonus or whatever the heck that number is? Like, how could you not know that when you are receiving? So as soon as you had something hit your pocket, how would you not know that the people that are making way less you would not want something to hit their pocket? Here's one thing I would have done. I think that when they were going for that big goal, they should have gotten the entire organization excited about it, number one. And they should have said, what do you think are like what would be the top 5 things you would love to see like as a team member benefit if we reach this big goal? And let them vote. And they come up with, I don't know, an extra day off, a $500 travel voucher, or an extra $500 bonus, or whatever that might be, right? But you put it on there and you let them vote, and you introducing them, and you let them have a voice, and you let them feel like they're bought into it. I mean, don't just get them bought into the goal, have them achieve the goal, and then the end result of like the celebration doesn't include them. And I think that's the key, is that when Andy talked about earlier, making sure we include all the voices, that's exactly what we mean. Is like when it comes to the decision-making table, that would mean your people that you hired are very intelligent, or else you would not have put your customers in their hands. So why wouldn't you include them, and not only the things when things aren't going great, but also when things are going good, and getting them bought in on the result and the celebration, and making them feel like owners. Mm-hmm. So try to do all that you can do to create that sense of ownership. And I don't care if you're $1 trillion company, you can create a sense of ownership in them and get them excited about what they get and how they benefit. I can guarantee you this: if I make a record year in my small little company, the people that are on my team that help me get there are absolutely going to benefit from it. And I know Andy already has this built in, so I'm going to push that out to him for a response. And then anything related to now, what do they do now on the stale cookie side, Andy?
Yeah, nothing like a stale cookie to really motivate you to want to do another $10 million in sales. But it's fascinating, this example, Jen, because it's interesting that they disregard is exactly the right word, Heather, you used. I mean, they completely were obtuse to what the employees would want after achieving this goal. So I happen to concur that having them part of the process is important. One of the things that if $10 billion is your goal as Sephora, and you want to get there, I would also include the employees on how do you think we get there? What are some creative ideas that you have that will help us get to $10 billion? And then ask them how to achieve that and what they think about it, and then actually pursue it. Think about some really good ideas that they have, and actually put some time and energy into pursuing that, because when you achieve it, you can point back at Jennifer or Sally or Michael, whoever had the idea, and say, you know what, that was your idea and it worked and we got here. And it's a really important part of how people buy in. Buy-in is really critical, and if people feel included, it's important. The other thing about once you get there at the $10 billion, I just have to chuckle at the stale cookie thing. I mean, it's just so crazy that would be the reward. What we do sometimes is for when we hit certain milestones at our company, we'll say, give us a monthly bill you have. We're going to pay a bill for you. Just pick any bill. And people will bring in their rent, or people will bring in a car payment, or they'll bring in their Excel energy bill. And we'll say, we're going to pay this bill for you. You were a part of the success. and we want to show you right down to your personal, savings, how much you mean to us. And so you can be alleviated of your rent for 1 month as a result of this, or we're going to take care of this for a month. And, nothing crazy. We're not going to go out and, spend a bunch of money trying to make everybody happy, because, what bonus amount is enough? Everybody has a different number. And I have found over doing this for such a long time that providing bonuses for people sometimes means it's great and it's fun, and people have an extra $500 or $1,000 or $2,500 in their pocket. But what's more valuable to them is what actually will hit their pocketbook differently. Like, you know what? If you would pay for my daycare for my child for a month, that would alleviate my stress a great deal. Done. Bring your bill and we'll pay it. And so we can't always do that, obviously. But when we hit milestones like that at our company, we really want to make sure that people feel it, not just have an extra, $20 in their pocket, but say, what makes a difference in your life that would alleviate this for you. So in the Sephora example, they hit 10 billion. I mean, think about that. $10 billion at Sephora is a very big deal. And they had to have an entire company help them get there. So involve the entire company in the process and an entire company in the victory. And, it almost is not worth sending out the stale cookie, right? You almost want to send out nothing other than a stale cookie, because it's so insulting. And it also makes people feel like, what did I do this? I mean, why is this, so important to me? They clearly don't think it is. They've achieved, as Heather said, their bonuses. They got their bonus. I got a cookie. It can't be emphasized enough that when you talk about compassionate leadership, and you talk about the ability to be, truly caring about those with whom you work, you want to think about where and how you can affect for the good your team the most. And if it's possible to keep it, professional, but you also want to make sure and have an impact, think about unique ways that you can make an impact with your team that actually affects them. And they walk away thinking, boy, Heather really cares about me, or Andy really thinks about what I care about in life. Like I could have that bill covered, and that really helps. But, kind of tossing a stale cookie at them or giving them a $500 travel bonus and saying, hey, enjoy, it kind of feels like you're missing the whole point. And that goes back to the original point Heather made about disconnect. This is another way that employers or bosses show they're so disconnected. It's like, are you clued in at all to what's important to me as one of the people on the team? Like, really? A cookie? Really? I mean, and it's really so surprising.
Andy, what do you think they should do now to try to remedy it? Like, even if they say, okay, Andy, we love your idea about having everyone send in a bill, but we're not going to do it. How do you think they should handle it just from like a social media and communications strategy?
Well, I'll tell you what, Jen, it's a great question. And I always tell CEOs, and we represent several high profile CEOs and companies. And I always say, poke fun at yourself. Okay. If you can make self-deprecating humor, that's really important. So just a quick example. So, there's a big company out there, big airline out there that made some major mistakes over Christmas last year, whom we represent. And they made some big mistakes. They overcommitted to flights and seats and stuff. And so people spent Christmas in the airport last year. And so one of the things we talked about with the CEO is you want to make sure you want to get back to the frequent flyers, the people that were stuck in an airport as a result of your airline's mistake, by giving them something that makes sense, not giving them a travel voucher to fly somewhere someday, but give them 100,000 miles on their account as a result of your mistake. And he agreed to it, and he did it. And people woke up the next morning after announcing this to have, some had 50, some had 75,000, some had 100,000 mile credit on their account, which really had an impact. They could, put their family on the plane for a vacation in the summer at no cost, or they could fly somewhere and go see a relative. Those kinds of things are fixable. So in the Sephora example, I would poke fun. Actually, I'd create a new batch of cookies, right? And I would flood the company with cookies, and we'd make fun of the cookie thing. But I would say, you know what? We made a mistake, and the cookies were stale. So, we're going to poke fun at ourselves about the cookies. But here's what we really meant to imply. Here's what we really meant to say. And there's nothing wrong in leadership with saying I was wrong. So much so often leaders are concerned with pointing the finger back at themselves, and they feel like it's a weak spot. I say every day to our team here at the company, I say, we're big on communication, and I'm famous for my typos. Heather, I know you know about my typos. I have typos in my emails, and we talk about rereading your emails before you send them. But one gift for me from our Secret Santa, our company last year, was typing lessons. Right? So somebody gave me typing lessons for my Secret Santa gift, and it's hilarious, right? Because if you can't laugh at yourself, it's all for naught. So that kind of stuff is just really fun, and it builds trust, it builds camaraderie, and from the CEO on down, it shows we're all human beings. We're all people that are just trying to do the right thing here. We're all trying to go in the same direction and do the right thing, and we all make mistakes. And stale cookies or not, typos or not, let's fix them and make it right.
Yeah. And to be honest, like me putting myself in the shoes of the people that I have to go back after, I love the cookie idea. I think it's fun to poke fun. And I think another good thing is, you know what, we're going to be creating like an employee council, and we're committing blank amount of money to do something that you all want, whether it's an event, whether it's whatever, it doesn't matter. And we want you to get together. You all going to come up with how we're going to spend this money based on your behalf. And if you say you want let's just say it's $1 billion. I'm not making up a number. You want this to be spent blanky blank way or in multiple different ways? That's what we're going to do, because we're here. We want you to know that we know that you were an extremely important part of where we were able to be successful. And so, and we didn't do that. We dropped the ball the first time, but just know, like, you are the most important thing. Like, I just think that's going to be so important in this, right? So important.
Okay. Let's also talk about, because that sounds, what we've just been talking about sounds a lot like the internal communications with the employees, and how you would apologize, how you would listen or respond, follow up, and then take action. Heather, you talk about this in your book, Art of Active Listening, like how you would take action on that. Let's also talk about leveraging social media. Okay. So the PR disaster has happened, and now the impact is not just on the lives of the employees, but now customers have a bad taste in their mouth. They feel like their values aren't being reflected back to them by individual companies. How would you recommend, Heather, you first, and then Andy? Heather, how would you recommend that an individual leader handle or leverage social media? Or would you even recommend this so that an individual leader is handling social media and communicating, knowing that customers are watching? How would you recommend that they handle it? And then Andy, I'll pass the question back to you.
I would say, I mean, if it's an individual leader, like an executive leader, like somebody in the C-suite, I'm going to be honest, I would go to somebody like Andy on that. I would make sure that before I went out there the next time, because I already messed up the first time, obviously, that I have the right strategy when I go out there again, and I go to an expert like Andy on how exactly should we do this? Because we're going to try to make this right. And we want our customers to know that really what we did was a mistake. We are human, but that this is not our organizational value structure. And hopefully it doesn't reflect on our organization. So I would go do that. Number one. I would have to say that if it was one employee and one manager, I lean on the relationship between me and that person. So I wouldn't be going on social media personally. I would want to sit down with that person and just say, listen, I totally screwed up. And I know I did. And I thought I knew the right way to go past this, but I don't really know. And so I don't know. I'd like to come to you and for you to tell me, like, how you think I could do better. How would you have done that differently? Like, what could I have done differently to make sure that I didn't? Because my intent was not to mess up our relationship. Our relationship is extremely important to me, and I feel like I've maybe severed little parts of it, and I'm at a loss on how to make this right. So I'm going to come to you. So I'm going to be the person who wants to be honest, go with the team member and have them tell me, and hopefully they get from my heart that they can tell me the truth of the matter, and I'll go about trying to solve for that. So in that psychoactive listening I talk about, I want to seek to understand, and I want to take the time to process what they give me, and I want to take action, and I want to make sure the action is right-sized. I want to go back to them and say, how is that feel for you now? Is that better? I know I messed up hard the first time, and I'm really trying to go a long way. How does that feel now? And I just keep going back to tweak until the relationship is back intact again. Closing that loop with them so that they know I care. That's what I would do on the one-on-one side. But, again, as you go higher and higher up, if you're going to if it's already out in a big way on social and you're trying to make a statement, I would go to Andy on that.
All right, Andy, what would you add?
So I think Heather's right. First of all, I think we often classify social media and websites as validators.
Okay.
Websites and social media are not meant to pass on major announcements or to do massive apologies if they're not done in another way first. So, for example, let's take that airline that goofed up over Christmas. When we said to the CEO, we're going to have to apologize, we did a live video chat first with the employees and with the team members of the airline. And then we took out a 30-second ad on NBC, CBS, and ABC and apologized. So we went out on multimedia streams, and then we went out on social media as a third option to validate our apology. Because if you apologize on social media, it's kind of like when you get the when somebody gets an email or a tweet or a message or a text from somebody, and it's a little terse, it's a little sharp, and they're kind of hiding behind their screen, right? Because they can say something that they wouldn't say to your face, but they'll say it on social media, and that's oftentimes what happens. And so, what in social media professionally, that should only be used as a validator. So that should further the apology. So I want to make it clear, as CEO of X company, I want to apologize for the mess up we did at Christmas. Here's what happened. Here's why. But it's only used as a validator. Same with websites and that kind of thing. Social media can be a very useful tool to get to people immediately, and a lot of them immediately. But it should not be used as a primary way to express condolences or regret, because it doesn't feel genuine. And it's kind of like people, when they're running for office, for example, and they put out a tweet or they put out something on social media, and it's a major announcement, it's a policy announcement or something, they typically don't get it as effective, don't get it as effective on social media, as opposed to having a one-on-one conversation with a reporter to announce it first, for example, or announcing it in a speech. It doesn't work as well. Social media isn't personal. It doesn't allow for the personal touch that Heather talked about, hey, I screwed up and I apologize, and this is not the way I want our relationship to go forward. That's totally a personal way to do it. That's the opposite of social media. Social media is meant to be a sort of an announcement to the masses, and it feels less personal if you do it on social media. So the social media is a tool, but as I tell people all the time, it's one tool on the tool belt. It's not the only tool. So using it as a way in which to express emotion, particularly regret or sorry or apology, is not effective, because people don't see it as genuine. They see it as, okay, well, I got a message today, a massive email that went out to 100,000 people that said, we're sorry for our mistake, we'll never do it again. But did it feel right? Well, you know what? I also saw a commercial where the CEO apologized, or I heard it on the radio, or I saw it come across in a message where the CEO stood up and apologized, on TV. That kind of thing is much easier to do than social media. And so the tool is effective, but it is a tool, but it's not the only tool.
Yeah.
I love that. And actually, Ashley, I noticed somebody on our team who puts this there. Can you talk about companies or leaders that only act when there's backlash, like advice for employees, and when they're only acting because of backlash? And that, yeah, that's a very good question. I think this is kind of goes back to what Jen was talking about before, which is that like proactive view. Like, how do we embed care and compassion in our organization as it relates to each other, from leaders to team members, from between team members, and even external to customers? How do we embed it? And I think a lot of it has to do with, it's not just like the vision, the tagline, the mission, like the writing. It's how much do we embody the thing? How much do we show recognition when it's exhibited? How much do we actually give you points off in your performance review when it's not? We have to put, like, if the rubber meets the road, when it's the behaviors and how we then recognize or not the behaviors, right? And I think if at the top level, and then every manager from the down to the team leader doesn't do that, and again, embody and live it themselves and hold themselves accountable when they don't, because I think that's a big part. It's like you can't just hold people accountable, that you don't hold yourself accountable. Then we can't then embed it. We can't ingrain it inside the culture. And it is that understanding. I'm going to give you an example of this. I had a I had a couple team members who were listening in. I had a team member who was a team lead in a call center, and she was responsible for listening in on calls and kind of giving feedback on calls to customers. And at some point, she's listening in on a conversation with two people that kind of report up to her. She's a team lead over these people, and on this call that's recorded, the two people are talking about her, okay, and not a nice way. So she's doing her normal thing, like I've tasked her to do, to listen into calls, and she hears these people talking about her, and she's really, really hurt. And she's hurt even more so because she was the kind of team leader who everything she did was for other people. So she was always trying to find a way to make their life easier, but they didn't see it that way. And so our team values were very clear. Well, in fact, we all came up with them at our meetings. And so then when I heard, she said, can you listen to this? When I listened to this, I said, okay, no, this is not in line with our team values. So I called each of them into my office individually. It was the first time in my entire leadership career that I wrote two people up. And it was because they agreed in our team meetings to the team values. They were not exhibiting or embodying those values as it relates to this person who I very often heard her advocating for them. But they were talking down about her. And I said, this is just not it's not who I stand for. It's not what we agreed to. Therefore, based upon the company values and this and that, you're going to be written up for this behavior. So it was me saying that, yes, we can say this is our value, but do we recognize it on the positive side, and or do we enforce it when we fall short? And we need to have more organizations at the top down really being able to do that. Do you embody it? How much do you really? And are you going to enforce it and or recognize it when the behaviors are good? And that way you don't get it to the point where, like Ashley's talking about, it goes off the rails on social because you aren't validating the behavior you're looking for.
Yeah, it's so, that's so right. And what Ashley's talking about is really important, because if you only hear from leadership when there is a backlash, when there's something that's happened, then they're not listening to you every day. They're not adhering to what they've agreed, and they're not living the company culture that I'm sure they want to have inside their company. And so, that's a tough process. I would also say, in talking about other people, inside any company, inside any office, or manufacturing facility, or steel mill, or wherever you work, all of that, there's always going to be kind of gossip, and there's going to be that kind of talk all the time amongst people. That's just part of human nature, and it might not always be negative. It might just be, hey, they have certain opinions about people and they talk about them. But the reality of it is, when you only hear from leadership when that kind of thing happens, or you only hear from leadership when there is something to fix, then they're not paying close enough attention to the everyday happenings of the company to prevent that from happening in the future. So you might have employees who talk about their boss and say, boy, he or she is never around when we, have good things happen. They're only around when things don't go well. And that's not great. It's not great to always be reprimanded. It's not always great to feel the backlash from the leader. It's also good to hear from him or her when they want to express gratitude, or they want to say, you've done a good job here. And that's an important part of listening as well. That's why I think so. I think, Heather, your book about listening is so important, because it really makes important the point about just being quiet, about just listening and being a part of the conversation by just physically being there, being present and listening. And employees don't always expect the leadership to have answers right away. They're not looking at you and asking a question saying, can you tell me right now what you're going to do to fix this? Sometimes they understand you might need some time to think about it, or you might want to seek feedback from others, or you might want the opportunity to just kind of take a beat a little bit and hear from other people in the room before you give an answer. All of that is acceptable to employees. They just want to be heard. They want to be recognized. And there's nothing wrong. In fact, in my opinion, which is probably the minority opinion among corporate America, it's actually more important to be the quiet leader, to be the one that's actually listening and then getting feedback and then answering after he or she has received that feedback. And it's really important that be the focus of how to lead. I talk a lot about, in our talks, we talk a lot about servant leadership. Leadership is really about serving, and it's about service. It's not about necessarily being the big shot, or the one who makes the most money, or the person whose name is on the letterhead. It's also about serving. It's about service. And if you include your team in that service, that really is the recipe for success, because it increases your retention level. People feel valued, they want to stay, and people want to come work for you. They want to come work with you. They want to be a part of your team. That's a part of this process. So to Ashley's question, I mean, I think that if leadership is only interested in the times to appear when there's a backlash, that's not real leadership. That's not stewardship. That's just reacting.
Yeah.
Love it.
As we start to wrap up the video for today, I'd like to let's imagine that there is a caring leader, a servant leader, a compassionate leader who's watching this video, and they know that something is coming down the line that is going to impact the lives of their employees. Maybe it's a return to work order, or it's a layoff, or it's a reorganization, an acquisition, a merger, something. And they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all of the internal and external communications. And how do I hurry up and become a better leader before this big change comes down? What hope? Let's leave everybody with some hope. What hope could we leave this caring leader with? Just one next step that they need to take, or one question that they need to ask themselves to start to move in the right direction?
Andy, you go first.
Authenticity. For me, it centers, Jen, around authenticity. It centers around the idea of being authentic, being transparent, and being truly who you are. If you are a leader and you're facing a difficult decision or a difficult piece of news you have to give in the next week or two, and you're preparing yourself for it, yes, I mean, we do this. We prepare CEOs and leadership all the time for these kinds of things. But one of the things we talk about instantly, right away when we first meet that leader, is, what does your heart say? Are you authentic? Are you being authentic in this message? And as close to authentic as possible always wins the day. If it's possible to be as human and as clear-minded as the employees that will hear it will be, then that insinuates and will accentuate your leadership. And they'll see it and they'll feel it. And it may be difficult to talk about. It might not make it any less difficult for them to hear, but it'll make it easier for you to tell them. And they'll see it in your voice. I go back to what Heather said a few minutes ago about when her colleague she could feel it hurt him to say it. If people see that in you, and if it's true, if it's authentic and true and honest, then it's easier to say, and it's easier to also to accept when it's authentic and genuine. That's
Great.
Really, truly leadership.
Yeah, anybody can do that. You don't have to enroll in a caring leadership course and try to, cram with new knowledge and new skills. Anybody can just be authentic and be yourself. Heather, what do you say as your final thought?
As I think through those preparing for this, I would say first is to be prepared. So figure out how much you can give people a heads up. So what can you say? Because often there's a total closed lip type of philosophy from the leadership team and even HR, where you just can't allude or say a thing in advance.
Right.
So you don't, but then, okay, the next step for me is, I'm going to think through, what are the next 3 things as soon as I tell them? What are the things I'm going to do to make this less of a blow on them? So I'm going to be thinking about what those steps are, kind of like the thoughtful process I shared for you in that layoff process. Some of them they may not have thought about, but it was like, does this person have any outstanding, do they have insurance? Do they have any outstanding bonuses due to them? Like, just all the different impacts. I know these people, I know they have children, blah, 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 blah. Just continue to look through the line and say, what could be the impacts as we have to let them go? And then, of course, at the same time, what are going to be the actual words I use? And what do I want them to leave with? And because dignity is my end goal for just all humans, how do I make sure that I am the one who leads in making sure they lead with more dignity and tact? While I know it's going to be painful and it's going to be a while for them to get over this, how can I just make it a little softer blow for them? And I think that if we think it through from an experiential standpoint, because one thing that we don't think about is they could be rehired back, because this happens often where they're rehired back. And so if we didn't do it right, they may not want to come back. But even if they could come back, they might not, but they might refer a friend if we took care of them in a way that gave them that cushion, that sense of care through the exit process. So I think it's just being super thoughtful in that process of what could go and how this could go, and how can I support this person, these people, as they exit the door. So
Yeah.
that's what I would do.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, thinking through the end result and how you want that to go. Okay, let's also end on some resources that you both may have either on your company websites or, Heather, you have your books. Let's give the audience here an opportunity to connect and get some resources from you. Andy, where should we point people in your direction?
Sure. So the best place to go for resources for us is if you go on our website, which is dovetailsolutions.com. And there's a place for you to send a note to info@dovetailsolutions.com. We respond within the hour to all of those. And that's a great place to ping us and just say, hey, thinking about this, would love a call back. You'll get a call back right away, and we'll take care of it right away. That's the best place to go for us, for sure. And then someday I get to hopefully be as successful as Heather and write a book or 2 or 3. But that's truly amazing. The other thing I'd say is read Heather's books too. They're very valuable. But that's for us. That's where the best place to go for us.
Perfect. Heather?
We'd have to say probably your best bet is to go to the heatheryounger.com site, and you'll get we have a caring leadership kit at the bottom of that gives you like some checklists, some things to think about. And when you do that, you'll be introduced to all the other stuff we do. And so just a way to do it, obviously right here on LinkedIn, the main place where we're streaming. This is a big place where we do a lot of, we provide venues like this, forums like this, right? So following along with other ways. And I think we do listen. That's the core of the work we do at Employee Fanatics. And so if you give us feedback or have other things that you're interested in, and we think it's going to align well with all the different people in the network, we will then continue to just offer more support to you. So books, all the things are there, but I think if you just follow along with the different forums, we'll continue to offer these for you too.
And I would say from personal experience too, is to link in with Heather on LinkedIn and follow her, because she's got a lot of pointers and stuff that are out there all the time that are really valuable and important, and you can grab them and use them in your own workspace, and they're highly sought after. So congratulations to Heather on your success, and thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Andy. Of course, I wouldn't have thought of anybody else thinking about crisis communications and any of this stuff. Andy is coming on with me, so thanks for having me. Coming on. Yeah.
Grateful.
And if you're watching the replay, make sure that you leave a comment down below. Your questions will get answered. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
everybody. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.